Come on, please don't die on me now, Xander James muttered as he patted the dashboard of his rusted-out sedan, coaxing it into the last parking spot on the crowded downtown street. His 6-year-old son, Nolan, sat in the backseat, swinging his legs and clutching his half-eaten peanut butter sandwich. Is it gonna blow up? Nolan asked, wide-eyed. Xander exhaled a tired laugh. Not today, buddy. But keep your seatbelt on, just in case. As he killed the engine, a sleek black Bentley coupe pulled up beside them, clearly out of place in the sea of beat-up Toyotas and Hondas. The driver, a woman, stopped half out of the spot in the tightest parallel park he'd ever seen attempted by someone who clearly had no idea what they were doing. He glanced at Nolan, then out the window. The woman had stepped out, heels clicking on the curb, staring helplessly at the space between her car and the others. Stay here. I'll be right back, Xander said, opening his door. Dad, are you gonna help her? Looks like she needs it. The woman turned as he approached, brushing a lock of chestnut hair from her face. She wore a cream silk blouse, gold earrings, and a look of total frustration. I swear I passed the test, she muttered under her breath, then caught sight of him. Is it that bad? Xander chuckled. It's creative. You want help? Please. I have no idea how I even got this far. He slid into the driver's seat before she could offer any more protest. You mind if I move your seat back? I'm kind of tall. Go for it, she said, stepping back. In less than 30 seconds, he had the car smoothly in place. When he stepped out, she stared at the perfectly parked Bentley like it had just parallel parked itself. You're a miracle worker, she said, looking stunned. What do I owe you? Nothing, he shrugged, heading back to his car. Wait, she called after him. Seriously, thank you. That would have taken me 10 tries and I still would have ended up on the news. He grinned, nodding toward Nolan, who was pressing his face to the window. My son's hungry. We're late for dollar burgers. She followed his gaze, softening. That your kid? Yeah. Nolan, I'm Callie, she said, offering a hand. You saved me from a parking ticket and public humiliation. He shook her hand briefly. Xander, no problem. Callie hesitated, then grabbed her purse from the car. Can I buy you guys lunch as a thank you? He blinked. You don't have to do that. I want to. There's a diner around the corner. I'll even let your son pick the milkshake flavor. Nolan, now climbing out of the car, beamed. Strawberry. Xander looked down at him, then back at Callie. She was smiling, genuine and warm, not the type of person he expected to meet inside a $500,000 car. All right, he said finally. But only if I pay next time. She raised an eyebrow. You planning on seeing me again? I don't usually help strangers park, but if you're this bad at it regularly. She laughed, and it was the kind of laugh that made people turn and look. Fair enough, she said. Lead the way. The diner was small, cozy, and smelled like grilled onions and syrup. Callie slid into the booth across from Nolan while Xander sat beside his son, watching her casually flip through the menu like she hadn't just stepped out of a luxury vehicle in designer heels. So, she asked, sipping her coffee. What do you do, Xander? Construction. When I can get work. It's been slow lately. Her eyes flicked to his calloused hands. You built things? Used to. Now I mostly fix things people didn't do right the first time. Nolan piped up with a mouthful of fries. We live in an apartment where the walls are super thin. Dad says we can hear our neighbor's cat sneeze. Callie laughed again. Sounds cozy, Xander smiled. That's one word for it. And his car is loud and smells like peanut butter, Nolan added proudly. Callie looked amused. That's oddly specific. It's our smell, Xander said, shrugging. Peanut butter and ambition. The waitress dropped the check halfway through dessert, and Callie snatched it before Xander could reach for it. Hey, he said, frowning. You can get the next one. Remember, he watched her pull out a sleek black card, one of those cards that meant money. Serious money. Thanks again, she said, standing. And for the record, I'm not usually that bad at parking. I just panic when I know people are watching. He nodded, still watching her. You always carry a card like that for diner burgers, she paused, then smiled. I carry it for everything. They walked back toward their cars together, Nolan skipping ahead with a lollipop in hand. Before getting into her Bentley, Callie turned to him. Are you always this helpful to strangers? Only when they drive cars worth more than my apartment lease. She laughed again, but this time it was softer. I'm really glad you stopped, he shrugged. Right place, right time, she hesitated. Then, almost shyly, I'd like to see you again. If you're not too busy fixing other people's problems. He stared at her for a second, surprised. Yeah, I'd like that. Good. She smiled, then leaned in and kissed him on the cheek. Tell Nolan I'll see him again, too. As he watched her drive off, Nolan tugged on his arm. Dad, are we gonna see the pretty lady again? Xander looked down at his son, then back toward the street where the Bentley had vanished. Yeah, kid, he said, a little dazed. I think we are. 2 weeks passed before Xander heard from her again. It wasn't that he hadn't thought about her, he had. More than he wanted to admit. Not just because she was beautiful or because she'd paid for lunch without blinking, but because she'd asked to see him again, and she'd meant it. He saw it in her eyes, but life had a way of stealing time. Between juggling shifts on a renovation site 2 towns over and taking Nolan to and from school, Xander barely had time to breathe. He didn't have her number, didn't even know her last name. For all he knew, she'd flown off to Paris or wherever people who carried cards like that went. Then on a gray Thursday afternoon, someone knocked on his apartment door. Can you get it? Nolan called from the couch, eyes glued to a cartoon. I'm building a spaceship. Xander pulled the door open, expecting a neighbor complaining about the garbage chute again. Instead, there she was. Callie, in jeans and a navy coat, her hair damp from the drizzle and a paper bag clutched in her arms. He blinked. How do you even know where I live? I asked the diner waitress, she said, brushing a raindrop from her brow. She said you bring your son in every Sunday. I bribed her with a 20. You tracked me down for what, exactly? To return the favor. She lifted the bag slightly. I brought dinner, and I didn't crash into anything on the way here. He stepped aside. Come in. Callie stepped inside cautiously, glancing around the small apartment. A stack of laundry sat on the kitchen chair. A cracked Spider-Man mug held pencils on the counter. The place was clean but worn, like it had been holding its breath for years. Hi, Nolan popped up from the couch, eyes lighting up. You're the car lady, guilty, she said, kneeling to his level. I brought burgers and curly fries. Xander crossed his arms. You bribed him too. No, but I figured you wouldn't say no to hot food. They sat around the tiny kitchen table, legs brushing under the cramped space. Nolan chattered between bites, telling her about the spaceship he was building and how his teacher wore socks with cats on them. She listened like every word was urgent news. After dinner, Nolan dragged his blanket onto the couch and promptly fell asleep, cradling a toy rocket. He's out cold, Callie whispered, eyes on the boy. You're doing a good job. Xander leaned against the counter. Some days feel like I'm just trying not to drown. You're not. He's happy. That counts for more than you know. He studied her quietly. Why are you here, really? Her gaze didn't flinch. Because I wanted to see you again, and because I've been thinking about you. You don't know anything about me. Then tell me. He hesitated, then pulled out a chair. Fine, let's trade. You go first. Callie sat, folding her hands. I run a company that manages boutique hotels. My father started it, but I've expanded it over the last few years. We just opened one in Barcelona. So you're the boss. That's one way to put it. I'm in meetings more than I sleep. My last vacation was 3 years ago and ended with a broken phone and a panic attack in Santorini. Xander leaned back. Why panic? Because I didn't know how to stop working, he nodded slowly. I get that, she tilted her head. Your turn, he glanced at the sleeping boy. I used to work commercial builds, big stuff. Then my wife got sick. We spent everything trying to save her. After she passed, I took whatever work I could get that let me be around for Nolan. Callie's expression softened, but she didn't pity him. He appreciated that more than she knew. I have no safety net, he said. Every time I fix someone's roof or patch a wall, I'm just hoping it buys us another week. She was silent for a moment. Then, you ever think about doing something bigger again? He laughed once. I think about a lot of things. Doesn't mean they're possible. What if someone made it possible? He narrowed his eyes. You offering me a job, I'm offering you a chance to do what you're good at. My company's opening a new property in the city. We've had 3 contractors walk out. I need someone who can actually finish the job. You don't even know if I'm good. I know you parked a car with 2 inches of space on either side, and I know you've got the hands of a man who doesn't cut corners. He shook his head slowly. Why me? because I trust my gut. And I like you. He didn't speak for a long moment. Then, you're serious? I'll pay double your current rate, health benefits, and I'll cover Nolan's after-school program. He stared at her, stunned. You've only met me twice. Sometimes twice is enough. He ran a hand through his hair. You're not just doing this because of what happened with your car, are you? No, I'm doing this because I think you're exactly the kind of person I want on my team. She paused. And maybe because I like the way you look at me like I'm not wearing a price tag. He exhaled slowly. I'll think about it. Don't take too long. The project manager's hanging on by a thread. As she stood, he walked her to the door. Rain drizzled outside, catching in the yellow glow of the street lamp. She stepped out, then turned, eyes bright. Next time, I'm making you dinner. He raised an eyebrow. You cook. I own a hotel. I have access to chefs. And you're not above cheating, she grinned. Not when I'm trying to impress someone. He watched her walk to a waiting car that had been idling quietly at the curb, a silver Audi, different from the Bentley. As she slid in, the driver gave Xander a nod, then pulled away. He shut the door slowly, leaned back against it, and looked at the sleeping boy on the couch. Dad, Nolan mumbled, half asleep. Did the pretty lady bring dessert? Xander smiled faintly. Not tonight, buddy, but something told him she'd be back, and not just with chocolate cake. Xander stepped carefully around the scattered blueprints and electrical schematics that covered the folding table in the unfinished lobby. The air inside the hotel smelled like drywall dust and fresh paint, and the low hum of drills echoed from somewhere above. The building was a skeleton of what it would eventually be: steel bones, empty walls, and high hopes. He'd taken the job, not because of the money, though that helped. Not even because of the perks, which were more than he'd ever been offered in his life. He took it because it felt like someone had finally looked at him and seen more than a man barely staying afloat. Callie hadn't stopped visiting the site since he started, but she never hovered. She came with purpose, checking timelines, asking pointed questions, listening to his assessments without interrupting. She was sharp, decisive, and clearly respected by the people she worked with. But when they were alone, something shifted. Her shoulders relaxed. Her gaze lingered. Today, she stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, sunlight casting long shadows across the concrete floor. She wore a dark plum blazer over a cream camisole, and her hair was pulled into a low twist at the nape of her neck. She was typing on her phone, but looked up the moment he approached. "Did the shipment come in?" she asked. "Tiles late again. I called the supplier myself this time. They're promising Monday." Her brow furrowed. "We can't delay the bathrooms on the second floor another week." "I know. I've got my guys finishing the fixtures in the south wing instead." "We'll pivot," she nodded slowly. "Good call." Xander folded his arms. "You okay?" She blinked. "Why? You've checked your phone 5 times since I walked in. You only do that when you're waiting for bad news." Callie hesitated, then slid the phone into her pocket. "My father's in town." Didn't realize that was a reason to brace for impact. He wasn't supposed to come. He just showed up at the main office this morning. Said he wanted to see how things are running, which really means he doesn't trust that I can handle this expansion without him. Xander leaned against the edge of the table. Is he the type to say that out loud? He doesn't have to. He'll just circle things in red ink and ask why I didn't do them his way. "You want me to accidentally spill coffee on his notes," she laughed, but there was tension behind it. He's old school, thinks everything has to be done with hard lines and a heavier hand. I've worked for guys like that. They bark louder than they build. He used to be brilliant, still is in some ways, but he thinks compassion is weakness. I've been trying to run things differently. "You are," Xander said, "and it's working." She looked at him, and for a moment her walls cracked open just enough. "You always do that." "Do what?" "Say the thing I didn't know I needed to hear." He shrugged. "Maybe I'm just good at reading blueprints people ones too." Callie opened her mouth to respond, but her phone buzzed again. She glanced at the screen, then sighed. "I have to go meet him at the office. He wants to review projections, which means we'll argue for 2 hours and get nowhere." "Want backup? You offering to be my bodyguard now? I've had worse gigs." She smiled faintly. "I'll be fine. I've survived worse meetings." As she walked toward the door, she paused and turned. By the way, there's a gala next Friday for investors and partners. It's a whole thing, black tie, champagne, too many speeches. Sounds fancy, I want you there. He arched a brow. Me. In a tux, she nodded once. You're part of this project, you should be recognized. Xander hesitated. I'm not exactly gala material, I disagree. He didn't answer right away, then he said, okay, but only if there's real food, not just tiny stuff on sticks. There's a full dinner. And an open bar. Now we're talking. She smiled and disappeared through the doors, heels clicking against the floor. That night, after Nolan was asleep and the apartment had gone quiet, Xander stood in front of the bathroom mirror, holding a suit jacket Callie had sent over. Dark charcoal gray, tailored to his measurements with a sleek black tie folded in the pocket. There was no price tag, just a note tucked inside, you'll look like you belong. Because you do, see, he stared at his reflection. The man in the mirror looked like someone he hadn't seen in years, sharper, steadier. A man who might actually have a future that didn't involve duct tape and second-hand tools. When Friday arrived, the gala was held at a rooftop ballroom in the city, the skyline glittering behind walls of glass. The elevator doors opened to reveal a room full of shimmering dresses, polished shoes, and the hum of string instruments. Xander adjusted his tie and stepped inside, feeling like an imposter walking into a world that didn't speak his language. Then he saw her. Callie stood near the far end of the room, her back to him, laughing with a small group of people in tailored suits. She wore a navy gown that hugged her frame and fell in elegant folds to the floor. Her earrings caught the light when she turned, and when her eyes found his across the room, something shifted in her expression. She excused herself and crossed the floor slowly, her gaze never leaving his. I was right, she said, stopping in front of him. You do clean up well. You're not so bad yourself, he said, voice low. She reached up, straightened his tie slightly, and smiled. You nervous? Not yet. You will be, she whispered. Then she took his hand and led him through the crowd. Introductions came fast, faces, names, titles. People who looked at him, then at her, and tried to do the mental math. He didn't care. He kept her hand in his. She didn't let go. Later, on the rooftop terrace away from the noise, they stood near the railing, the city stretching out below them. This whole night feels like a dream, he said quietly. It's not, she replied. It's just what happens when you stop surviving and start living. He looked at her. You always talk like that, only when I'm terrified, he blinked. Of what? Of how fast this is happening. How much I want it to keep happening. He didn't move. You're not the only one, she stepped in closer. Things like this, they don't usually work, do they? Not unless both people want it badly enough. Her voice was barely a whisper. Do you? Yeah, he said, leaning down until their foreheads touched. I do. The sounds of the gala faded behind them, replaced by the wind and the rhythm of two people standing on the edge of something new, and neither of them looked away. Rain streaked across the windows of the cafe where Callie waited, her coat draped over the back of the chair beside her. She stirred her tea absently, eyes fixed on the street outside. She hated being late, but today had been out of her hands. Her father's departure had been as dramatic as his arrival, a 60-minute tirade wrapped in a thinly disguised warning about trust, control, and how easily empires slip when built on emotion instead of metrics. What he didn't know was that Callie had already made her choice. A bell above the door chimed. She looked up as Xander stepped in, shaking water from his sleeves. He spotted her immediately and crossed the room in a few long strides. You okay? He asked, pulling out the chair. You sounded off on the phone. I'm fine, she said, then caught herself. No. Actually, I'm not. He's gone, flew out this morning. Xander leaned back, watching her. He say what he came for, to remind me what I owe him, and what I'll lose if I mess this up. You're not going to, I know, but he doesn't. Or maybe he just doesn't want to believe that the company's changing without him. You're not him, Callie, she met his eyes. That's the point. He built it with walls and rules. I'm trying to build it with people. You think that's naive? Not for a second. She exhaled, then reached into her bag and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. What's that? An offer. She slid it across the table. I want you heading the next project, a full renovation in Charleston. It's a historic property, total gut and rebuild, but I want it done right. Xander didn't touch the paper. That's not local. No, but it comes with relocation support. I'd cover everything: housing, schools, even bring in someone to help with Nalan if you need it. He tilted his head. Why this? Why now? Because I trust you. Because I know you'll protect the integrity of the space without cutting corners. And because this isn't just about a job. It's about what we're building together. He looked down at the paper, then back at her. I'd have to move my kid across the country. I know, she said carefully. It's a lot, but I wouldn't ask if I didn't believe in you, in both of you. He sat in silence for a long beat, then tapped the edge of the offer. If I say yes, I need to see the school first. And I want to say in the crew. You'd be the one hiring them. And I need time. Nolan's got friends here, his teacher's solid. I won't rip him out of his life without knowing what I'm walking into. Callie nodded. Take the time you need. I just wanted you to know the door's open. He studied her. And what about us? She leaned forward. That's not a door, that's a foundation, one I want to keep building. A slow smile tugged at his mouth. You rehearsed that, didn't you, in the cab? He reached for her hand across the table. I want it too, but I need to do right by him first. I wouldn't respect you if you didn't. The next weekend, they flew to Charleston. It wasn't private. Callie didn't make a scene of it. Just 2 economy tickets, a quiet hotel, and a schedule full of site visits and school tours. Nalan tagged along, wide-eyed and full of questions. Callie gave him space to explore, never pushing, never coaxing. At dinner, she let him pick the restaurant, a seafood shack with paper menus and crayons on the tablecloth. 2 days in, Nalan looked up from his grilled cheese and said, I like it here, but do they have a rocket club? Xander raised a brow. A what? Rockets. We build them at school. Mine went over the roof once. Callie smiled. I'm sure we can find one. And if we can't, we'll start one. Nalan nodded solemnly. Okay, but we need a good name, not something lame like Space Kids, Xander laughed. You're already planning the logo, aren't you? That night, after Nalan fell asleep in their adjoining room, Xander sat beside Callie on the hotel's small balcony. I think he'll be okay, he said quietly. She looked over. And you? I'm tired of surviving. I want to build something that lasts. With you, she reached over and took his hand. Then let's do it. He turned toward her, the night warm around them. I've never done this with someone before, not like this. My marriage was different, comfortable, familiar, but this scares you? She asked. No. It wakes me up. She leaned in, resting her head on his shoulder. You wake me up too. The move happened 4 weeks later. Callie found them a house just outside the city, modest, sunlit, with enough yard for Nalan to build his rocket pads. The school accepted him mid-semester. He made friends within days. And when Xander walked into the site on the first day of demolition, the crew didn't see a man who had once patched drywall to pay rent. They saw the man in charge. The work was hard. Early mornings, late nights, endless decisions. But every time he came home to find Callie already there, barefoot in the kitchen, reading reports with Nalan quizzing her on spaceship terminology, something in him settled. 6 months later, the hotel opened. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was quiet. No press, no spotlight. Just the team, a few partners, and a surprise gift from Callie. A plaque inside the lobby that read, "This space was rebuilt by hands that never stopped believing. In memory of those we carry and for the futures we build." Xander read it once, then looked over at her, eyes full. She stepped close. You okay? He nodded, swallowing thickly. You did this. No, she said. We did. Nalan tugged on his sleeve. Dad, they have a dessert table with eclairs. Xander looked down. You know what that means. Dinner first? Nope. He picked him up, laughing. Race you? Later that night, after everyone else had gone, Xander found Callie still in the ballroom, barefoot on the empty dance floor. He walked up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist. You waiting for a song? I was hoping you'd ask me to dance. He swayed with her in the quiet, no music playing, just the rhythm of two hearts finally at peace. After a long silence, he said, I want to marry you. She turned in his arms. You're serious? I've never been more sure. She didn't cry, didn't gasp, just smiled, eyes shining. Then ask me properly. He stepped back, dropped to one knee, and pulled a ring from his pocket, simple, elegant, and unmistakably her, Callie Hart. Will you build the rest of our life with me? Her answer was a whisper against his lips. Yes. And this time, he wasn't just the man who helped her park. He was the man she chose every day, every step, every forever. The afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the lawn behind the house, where string lights were being strung between weathered oak trees, swaying lazily in the spring breeze. Xander stood barefoot on the porch, a handful of nails clenched between his fingers, watching Nalan chase a kite across the grass with two other kids from the neighborhood. Laughter echoed across the yard, unfiltered and free. He hadn't heard that kind of joy sustained, effortless from his son in years. Callie stepped out beside him, rolling up the sleeves of her linen shirt. "They're going to crash that thing into the tree." "I give it 10 more seconds," Xander said, tapping a nail against the wood rail. 5 if Nalan's steering. She leaned her shoulder against his. "You ready for tomorrow? I've built houses, handled crews twice my size, and rebuilt a historic hotel under deadline. But standing in front of that many people in a tux, not even close." Callie smiled without looking at him. "You're going to be perfect. I don't do perfect. Neither do I," she said quietly. "Which is why this works." He reached for her hand. "We've come a long way from a busted parallel park job. You didn't just fix my parking. You rewrote all my blueprints." The next morning came golden and bright, not a single cloud in the sky. The backyard had transformed into something out of a magazine. Rows of white chairs flanked a narrow aisle lined with wildflowers and lanterns. A small arch stood at the far end, draped in muslin and ivy. It wasn't extravagant. It didn't need to be. Xander stood near the arch, adjusting the cuffs of his shirt beneath the jacket Callie had insisted he wear. Nalan stood beside him, holding a small velvet box with both hands, his feet shifting nervously in his dress shoes. "You okay?" Xander asked. "I practiced 7 times. "I won't drop it. You'll be great. Are you nervous?" Xander looked out across the lawn where the guests were taking their seats. Callie's colleagues, a few close friends, the construction crew from Charleston, and the couple who ran the diner where it all began. Not even a little. The music started soft strings that seemed to float on the breeze, and then she appeared. Callie stepped through the back gate, her gown brushing the grass, her gaze locked on his. Her hair was swept into a loose knot, a few strands catching the light. There was no veil. No bouquet, just her. And it was more than enough. When she reached him, she didn't wait for any ceremonial prompt. She took his hands, steady and sure, and whispered, "It's always been you." The officiant smiled and continued, but Xander barely heard a word. Every part of him was focused on the woman in front of him. Her eyes didn't waver. She didn't blink away tears or fumble her vows. She spoke them like a promise she'd already been living. And when it was his turn, he didn't read from a card. "You found me when I didn't know I needed finding," he said. "You saw what I was too tired to hope for, and you gave it back to me. You never tried to fix me. You just stood beside me until I remembered how to lift my own weight. I will spend the rest of my life building a world where you feel as steady and safe as you made me feel the first time you said you believed in me." He slipped the ring on her finger. She rested her forehead against his and whispered, "I do." The moment the words were spoken, Nalan lifted the box with a triumphant, "Now," Xander laughed. "Now." The boy handed over the second ring with both palms. Callie took it gently, sliding it onto Xander's finger with a tenderness that didn't need ceremony to be sacred. When they kissed, the guests erupted into applause, and Nalan whooped loudest of all, pumping his fists like he'd just won a championship game. Later, under the lantern-lit trees, they danced barefoot on the grass, while Nalan and the other kids ran wild between tables, stealing extra slices of cake and pretending the candles were rocket launchers. "You realize," Callie said, leaning into Xander with her arms around his neck, "we never actually took a honeymoon." "I figured this was it." She tilted her head. "You know me better than that. Private plane. Already arranged. Warm climate. Very." He grinned. "How long?" "Week." "Nalan's staying with my friend Beth and her family. He's already packed." "I didn't forget the model rocket." Xander tightened his hold on her waist. "You thought of everything." She leaned in and brushed her lips against his ear. "That's what you do when you love someone." He pulled back enough to look at her. "Say it again." She didn't hesitate. "I love you. I love you too." The week that followed was sun-drenched and slow. A coastal villa with wide open windows, a private pool, and no schedule. They swam, read, and drank wine under the stars. They talked about everything plans for their next project, Nolan's obsession with space, the idea of starting something together that wasn't just business. A new kind of legacy. "Do you ever think about having more?" she asked one night, her head on his chest. "Kids," she nodded. "Sometimes. But I didn't want to say anything until I knew you were thinking it too. I've been thinking it." "Then let's see what happens." Back home, the house felt fuller. Not louder, not busier, just more alive. Nolan returned with stories of backyard adventures and a new best friend. The three of them fell into a rhythm that didn't need explaining. Months passed, and the Charleston Hotel thrived. Xander began mentoring local crews, teaching the kind of craftsmanship he once thought he'd left behind. Callie took on fewer projects but made them more personal. And together, they launched a design and build firm that focused on restoration and preservation, a partnership built on trust, grit, and shared vision. One evening, they stood side by side in their kitchen, the air thick with the scent of baking bread. Nolan worked on a blueprint at the table, his own version of a rocket lab. Callie was barefoot, hair up, a faint smudge of flour on her cheek. "I got a call from Savannah," she said, handing him a glass of wine. "Another property. They want us to take it." "You want to? Only if we do it together," he nodded. "Then we do," she leaned against him. "You know, I used to think success meant control, precision, but now it means this." Xander kissed her temple, his voice low. "Then we're already the richest people in the world." Outside, the string lights swayed gently in the breeze. Nolan looked up from his sketchpad and said, "Can we build it, Mom?" Callie looked at Xander, her hand finding his. "Yeah, baby," she said. "We can build anything."